Ron? Where is Ron right now?
Ron here. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. When Will Smith slapped the shit out of Chris Rock at the Oscars 5 months ago, some people were wondering whether this type of behavior, this proclivity towards physical violence, was perhaps a reflection of Will Smith's involvement in Scientology. After all, we've heard many stories of Scientology executives using physical violence to deal with one another. We've heard many stories of Scientology leader David Miscavige, who is Tom Cruise's best friend, using physical violence to deal with his subordinates. Now, Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith are no longer Scientologists, but the rub is they both claim to never actually have been Scientologists. And so I wonder how many of you actually remember when Will Smith was literally promoting Scientology in his media interviews, but pretending to sort of be doing it while not actually being a Scientologist. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about.
What about Scientology do you embrace?
I was introduced through it by Tom, and I'm a student of world religion. I was raised in a Baptist household. I went to a Catholic school, but the ideas of the Bible are 98% the same ideas of Scientology. You have people who are attacking and want to fight and don't know nothing. How you gonna not know nothing about Scientology and attack somebody? That's dangerous and it's ignorant. How can I condemn someone for what they believe? And I believe that God was born from a pregnant virgin.
Okay, so you notice in the beginning of that the reporter starts, she asks, what part of Scientology do you embrace? That's a pretty presumptive question. It's a very specific question, and it's a question that wouldn't be asked like, how does she know there's any part of Scientology that Will Smith embraces? It would make more sense to ask an open-ended question like, are you involved in Scientology, or what are your thoughts on Scientology? And I'm mentioning this because it sounds like the reporter was given a list of things to ask Will about, which to me sounds like Will Smith wanted to use this interview as an opportunity to discuss Scientology. And when you're an A-list celebrity and you're out there promoting a movie, you're not going to talk about anything unless it was part of your agenda to talk about it. It does not serve you or your interests or the interests of your movie to be out there saying positive things about Scientology. In order for this to happen, it had to be part of the agenda. Let's see what he says here comparing Christianity to Scientology.
The ideas of the Bible are 98% the same ideas of Scientology.
It's such a weird thing to say. First of all, Will, how would you know? You yourself would have to be intimately familiar with a very large amount of Scientology in order to even be able to claim to have an opinion like that on the matter. And that's just, sort of logically speaking, what would be required in order for you to claim to be able to have an opinion. The fact is, it's a false statement. There's almost nothing in common with Scientology and the Bible or Christianity. The only way you could make such a claim is if you were like, Christians strive to be good people and Scientologists strive to be good people, so they are for the most part the same. Like that's the stupid level that you would have to get to in order to really make comparisons like that. Beyond that, there is literally no overlap between anything in Christianity and the Bible and anything that's in Scientology. Which begs the question, why would Will even say something like that? It's only something that someone would say if they were a Scientologist and were engaging with, were cooperating with a PR and media strategy to make Scientology seem more acceptable to Christians at large. And when this interview and this PR tour was happening, I was still in Scientology, and there was no question in my mind that that is what was going on. So let's rewind the clock a little bit and let's see, how did we get to in 2008 where Will Smith is publicly promoting Scientology in interviews? Well, back in 2004, Will's wife Jada filmed the movie Collateral with Tom Cruise. This seems to likely be the first time that the Smith and the Cruise worlds collided. Will Smith said in an interview last year with British GQ, he said, Tom and I became friends in the middle of his public difficulties. Well, Tom's public difficulties started happening in 2005. May 2005 is when Tom jumped on Oprah's couch overnight, going from becoming Teflon Tom, media organizations wouldn't dare criticize him, to being known as Crazy Tom Cruise. The next month in June was Tom's famous interview on the Today Show with Matt Lauer, bashing Brooke Shields, bashing psychiatry, bashing anyone who ever takes medication for mental illness. Again, it contributed to Crazy Tom Cruise, unhinged Tom Cruise becoming the butt of jokes world over. Even later that month was Tom's interview with Peter Overton at 60 Minutes Australia, where Tom snapped at Peter for asking questions about Nicole Kidman. And this is the time that Will Smith is now saying is when he and Tom started to get close. Now, to a Scientologist, anyone getting close to Tom Cruise means this person is getting into Scientology and is being introduced to Scientology by Tom Cruise. The reason for that is that Tom Cruise lives in a very insular bubble. All of his business affairs, everything in his life is managed and dealt with by hardcore dedicated Scientologists. Tom Cruise is not a guy who has a lot of time in his life to just entertain non-Scientologist friends. I mean, Tom's best friend is the leader of the Scientology cult. I mean, to even sit down with Tom as a journalist and interview Tom, you're required to do a multi-hour introduction to Scientology. So just imagine what is required in order for you to become one of Tom's close personal friends. So fast forward to November 2006, Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes get married in Italy. Will and Jada are present at the wedding, and we now know, based on interviews that have been done with Leah Remini and also Jada Pinkett Smith, that by the time Will and Jada went to the wedding in November 2006, they were already well involved in Scientology. The month after the wedding, so December 2006, Will is promoting his movie, The Pursuit of Happiness. And for some reason, while promoting this movie, he keeps talking about his friendship with Tom Cruise. Here's an example. Will Smith was out in Westwood last night to premiere his latest movie, The Pursuit of Happiness. Will recently sat down with EW to talk about his new movie and his friendship with Tom. Turns out he's a little jealous of Tom's fame. "We never talk about competition," says Smith, "but we mark ourselves off of each other. Movie stars are becoming extinct, and Tom and I are helping one another. His wedding was world news. I love that, but I'm jealous. I'm so jealous of him right now. World news, Iraq and Tom. I'm like, dude, you're beating on me right now." So anyway, I don't know if other people see this interview the way that I see it, but when I was still in Scientology and all this was going on, it was very clear to me that there's no reason for Will Smith to be talking about Tom Cruise in his interviews unless it's part of a strategy to normalize Tom, normalize Scientology, and for Will to hold himself up there as kind of, in a way, a counter to Tom Cruise. It was apparent to me that Will Smith was trying to provide damage control because he was participating in the Scientology media strategy. Fast forward an entire year, Will Smith is now promoting the movie I Am Legend, and you have Tom Cruise showing up to the New York City premiere of the movie with Will Smith. It's no coincidence that just 2 or 3 weeks later is when you have Will Smith sitting down with Entertainment Weekly and the reporter asking him, starting the interview by saying, "What is it about Scientology that you embrace?" But the number one sign that Will Smith was in fact a Scientologist at this time came just a week before he sat down with Entertainment Weekly. He'd given an interview to a Scottish newspaper called The Daily Record. And in this interview, Will Smith broke the golden rule of being an A-list celebrity. You guys might not know this, but when you make it to the A-list in Hollywood, they give you a welcome pack. And the number one item in the welcome pack says very clearly, well, here, I'll let Will Smith tell you.
Keep
Hitler.
name out your mouth!
That's right, the number one thing they tell you not to do, just don't say anything positive about Hitler. Just steer way clear of saying anything remotely good about Hitler. Well, Will Smith, in his exuberance and enthusiasm to try to sneak some little Scientology concepts into the interviews that he was doing, he broke this rule by trying to explain a Scientology concept that all spiritual beings, no matter how evil the acts are they might be doing, no matter how evil they might seem, that all spiritual beings are basically good. Here's what happened. In a story published Saturday in the Daily Record, Smith was quoted saying, "Even Hitler didn't wake up going, 'Let me do the most evil thing I can do today.' I think he woke up in the morning and using a twisted backwards logic, he set out to do what he thought was good." Now, when this all happened as a Scientologist, I knew that he was trying to sprinkle his interviews with some Scientology concepts because that is what Scientology celebrities do. That is part of the strategy of normalizing in the real world things that are core to the Scientology belief system. And so this quote, again, there's no reason for an A-list celebrity to talk about anything like this unless it's part of an agenda, part of a Scientology PR agenda. Well, this quote did not go over so well. Also, the media does have a way of not only twisting quotes, but also making false, misleading headlines out of quotes. And the headline that ended up running on this article quoted Will Smith as saying, "Hitler was a good person," when that's not actually what Will said. Why in the world would anybody talk about any of this during a press tour for a frickin' movie? And the answer is because Will Smith was trying to emulate his Scientology mentor, Tom Cruise. And Tom had taken advantage of the PR opportunity of promoting movies to promote Scientology in his own way. Will Smith was walking in the footsteps of his mentor and trying to do the same thing, but it did not go well for Will Smith. Fast forward later that year, November 2008, Will and Jada open a Scientology school. They end up spending millions of dollars on this school, and they spent years denying that this was actually a Scientology school. The school was called New Village Leadership Academy, and it actually closed down in 2014. But in 2020, the Daily Beast did a story on this. The article interviews a couple people who were associated with this school, including a woman named Jacqueline Olivier. At least that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Jacqueline Olivier used to run the Gillespie School in La Jolla, California, and was hired by the Smiths to help found and oversee the New Village Leadership Academy. She says they never mentioned Scientology, but I remember they sent me the L. Ron Hubbard books and I didn't put it together. It just seemed like a great opportunity. There were other signs. Olivier says she soon discovered that all the teachers in the Smiths' home were Scientologists and remembers Pinkett Smith ordering her to take classes in study technology, a dubious teaching method developed by Hubbard that is foundational to Scientology. Olivier says she and other teachers were made to take courses at Scientology Celebrity Center in Hollywood, California, and also at Applied Scholastics, a Scientology-affiliated group that promotes study technology. We all went to Applied Scholastics. They have all these front companies that you only realize later are Scientology. And that is correct. Applied Scholastics and all of the associated umbrella organizations exist solely to act as front groups for Scientology. Any Scientologist knows this, but if you're not a Scientologist, it's possible to be easily duped by these things. I had to go down to the Celebrity Center and do stuff with the e-meter, and Jada was always at the Celebrity Center. My feeling is that Jada was really into Scientology and Will was sort of whatever, but he took all the courses too. So that is her opinion, that Will was less involved, and I've heard that from a lot of people. But to be less involved, if you're taking the courses, you're taking the courses. If you're getting auditing, you're getting auditing. If you really don't want to be involved, there's no point taking the courses. So I do understand the characterization that Jada was perhaps more enthusiastic about the entire thing and perhaps more dedicated to it. But if you're doing it, you're doing it. And if you're best buds with Tom Cruise, you're doing it. So Will never really had anything but negative backlash to his efforts to publicly promote Scientology, even though he was doing it kind of low-key. His efforts to publicly promote Scientology, his efforts to do things privately to help Scientology, like the school, never had anything but negative consequences. And in late 2013, early 2014, their Scientology school closed for good. And then the Smiths got very quiet on the subject of Scientology. And it's during this period that they began to distance themselves from Scientology and to distance themselves from Tom Cruise. And in November 2018 is when Will and Jada officially and publicly severed ties with Scientology, with all Scientologists. This would have been the nail in the coffin of the relationship between Will Smith and Tom Cruise. They brought Leah Remini onto Jada's Red Table Talk program to talk specifically about Scientology. This was Will and Jada's official public signal to everyone in Scientology: we're done. We're washing our hands of it. We're distancing ourselves from it, because from that point on, any Scientologists who the Smiths were still connected to would absolutely be ordered to officially disconnect from them. And I believe that fact is reflected in this quote that Will gave to British GQ when he said, "Tom and I became friends in the middle of his public difficulties." This might seem like a really minor thing, and I'm sure I read more into it than the average person, because I'm interpreting it, I'm reacting to it the way that a Scientologist would. Tom Cruise would consider it a negative portrayal of Tom Cruise to even acknowledge that 2005 was a period of public difficulties. If Will Smith was still being a Scientologist, acting and behaving as a Scientologist, there wouldn't even be a public acknowledgement that there was anything wrong with 2005. Scientologists think that Tom Cruise hit it out of the park in 2005. Scientologists don't think that Tom Cruise made an ass out of himself in 2005. They think that was Tom Cruise just being very uptone, and the aberrated society and the psych-controlled mainstream media was trying to attack him for just being an awesome guy. And the fact that the media was trying to tear Tom Cruise down doesn't mean that those were difficult times for Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise, in the eyes of a Scientologist, was flourishing and prospering regardless. Plus, this quote, "Tom and I became friends in the middle of his public difficulties," does, to me at least, I'm very curious if you guys see it the same way, it kind of implies that Will was helping Tom through that rough period. It sort of implies that he was the safe port of call, the person that Tom could come to confide in his struggles and his troubles. And I know to normal people that seems like a positive thing. In the world of Tom Cruise, that would be a negative characterization of Tom Cruise. In the world of Tom Cruise, Tom doesn't need to reach out to anybody for help. Tom has Scientology. Tom has David Miscavige. Tom doesn't need a shoulder to cry on. And if Will Smith was still being Scientologist Will Smith, or Tom Cruise's friend Will Smith, he would not put this quote out that implies Tom needed Will's friendship or relied on Will's friendship to get through those tough times. I realize it might seem like I am reading an awful lot into that, but if you're a former Scientologist, let me know if you read it the same way. And if you've never had anything to do with Scientology, let me know if you think, is that way, am I going way too crazy overboard on how I'm interpreting this, or do you kind of see it my way as well? There's no question at all that both Will and Jada are completely out of Scientology. Their interview with Leah made that crystal clear. And what happened with Will and Chris at the Oscars, Will assaulting Chris like that, I wouldn't attribute that to anything that Will picked up in Scientology. You know, I'm no expert on the subject, but as a non-expert, I'd be more inclined to attribute that to whatever the hell is going on between Will and Jada in that seemingly very toxic relationship. But I did want to remind everyone that there was a time when Will was without question a Scientologist. He was promoting Scientology in his movie PR press tours. And I just wish that the media would stop letting these guys lie about ever having been Scientologists. And you might go, well, what's the big deal? Who cares if they were or they weren't? And my response to that is, some people might not think it's a big deal, but the Smiths clearly do, or they wouldn't choose to lie and misrepresent the facts of the matter. So big deal or no big deal. If they're going to lie about it, someone's going to call them out on the lies. All right, everyone, that's all I have on this. Thank you for watching. Thank you to all of you who watch until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.